Usually when we talk about the history of human thought, there is this this massive, seemingly uncrossable canyon.
Right, a total divide.
Exactly.
Yeah.
On one side, you have the realm of science. It's, empirical, it's cold, it's mathematical. It is entirely about what we can measure, quantify, and prove in a lab.
The hard data.
Yeah, the hard data. And then on the other side, you have the realm of religion and spirituality. And this side is ancient, deeply metaphorical, and deals with things we intuitively feel, but maybe cannot put under a microscope.
Things that evade standard measurement.
Right. And we are taught pretty much from day one that these two sides are fundamentally opposed. Like they're essentially fighting a zero-sum war over the very nature of reality itself.
Which is how most people view it, yeah.
But I want you to just imagine for a second a world where those ancient debates between science and religion aren't actually a war at all. Imagine if they aren't opposing forces, but simply two different groups of people, separated by thousands of years, trying to describe the exact same physical reality.
But speaking two completely different languages.
Yes. Two totally different vocabularies.
I mean, it fundamentally changes the paradigm. You are moving away from a combative framework to a translational one.
Right.
Instead of asking who is factually right and who is historically wrong, you start asking a much more interesting question, which is, what if they are both pointing at the exact same phenomenon, just, using the different tools they had available in the respective eras?
And that is the exact mission of today's Deep Dives. We are unpacking a truly mind-bending stack of source materials today, outlining something called the C4 framework.
Yeah, the C4 documents.
Now brace yourselves, because C4 stands for Conformal Cyclic Cosmology, coupled with ULEP dark sector dynamics.
I know. It's a mouthful.
It sounds incredibly dense, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But the core mission of our conversation today is to explore how this specific framework acts as a scientific bridge. It literally attempts to translate ancient spiritual texts, specifically the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth, into the hard mathematical language of modern quantum physics and cosmology.
It's a massive undertaking.
It really is. We are going to look at how it redefines things like sin, love, and the soul into, thermodynamic equations and geometric data.
Right.
But a quick heads up before we really get into the weeds here. Because we are dealing with the teachings of a major historical and religious figure alongside, quantum field theory, we want to be incredibly clear about our role today.
Absolutely.
We are looking at this purely as a translation exercise. We are not endorsing this as absolute scientific fact, nor are we validating any religious viewpoints, dogmas, or taking any theological sides.
No, not at all.
We are just the impartial guides walking you through the fascinating architecture of the ideas presented in these specific texts.
I think that's a vital distinction to make. This is, it's a thought experiment. It's a synthesis proposed by the authors of the C4 documents, and our job is just to examine the mechanics of the framework they have built.
Trace their logic.
Exactly. Trace the logic and see how they attempt to connect these two historically disparate worlds.
So let's start right at the foundation.
Yeah.
The entire C4 source document relies on something it calls a profound category error.
Yes, the foundational error.
It argues that standard traditional theological interpretations of Jesus are fundamentally flawed. But, not because the events didn't happen.
Right.
They are flawed because of a massive misunderstanding of vocabulary over a couple of millennia.
To really grasp this category error, you have to put yourself entirely in the mindset of a first-century agrarian society.
Right. Think about their daily life.
Think about their reality, exactly. It was completely bounded by macroscopic physical observations. They understood seeds, seasons, weather, the biological cycle of life and death.
Farming stuff?
Yeah, farming, and, rigid hierarchical political structures like kings, governors, monarchs. That was the absolute limit of their conceptual toolkit.
Because they didn't exactly have textbooks on quantum mechanics lying around.
No, they definitely didn't.
I mean, if you don't know what a molecule is, you certainly don't have the words for non-local entanglement or, conformal geometry.
Precisely. They lacked the mathematical vocabulary of modern physics. So, according to the C4 framework, when these ancient people encountered or intuitively experienced an infinite, non-local, information-conserving scalar field.
Which the text refers to as the phi field.
Right, the phi field. When they experienced that, they were at a complete loss for words. They experienced the profound reality of it. They felt the interconnectedness. But to explain it to each other, to pass that knowledge down, they had to reach for the highest, most powerful concepts they possessed in their cultural lexicon.
Which were kings,
Yeah.
lords.
Masters.
Yes. They anthropomorphized an infinite field of energy into a singular, localized, monarchical god.
Wow.
They took a fundamental property of the universe's physics, like a field that dictates the geometry of reality, and they gave it a human face, human emotions, and a throne.
Because that was the only framework for ultimate power they had.
Exactly. They did this because, in their world, a king was the only way to communicate absolute authority and omnipresence. A king's law is everywhere in the kingdom. The C4 text argues that this is the foundational category error of modern religion. It's mistaking the medium for a man.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because that makes so much sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's like trying to explain a global Wi-Fi network to a medieval knight.
That's a great way to look at it.
Right. Imagine standing there in the 12th century with your smartphone, streaming a live video. The knight can't see the Wi-Fi. He can't touch the radio waves. He has literally no concept of digital data transfer.
None at all.
But he can absolutely see the effects. He sees the moving pictures on the glass in your hand.
Yeah.
What does he call it?
He calls it magic.
Magic. Or maybe the breath of an invisible spirit or some localized deity.
Yeah.
The ancients weren't wrong about the connection. They absolutely perceived the network. They just lacked the router manual to describe the invisible frequencies that were making it all happen.
That is a highly accurate analog for what the C4 authors are proposing. And the source materials actually provide a very striking visual representation of this exact transition in thought.
Oh, the storyboard, right?
Yes, in the production storyboard for their video piece. It's titled Faith and Physics, One Story. And they describe an opening scene meant to illustrate this historical false dichotomy.
How does it look?
Well, it's a split screen. On the left, you have a 17th century anatomical drawing of a human brain, which represents the dawn of biological, materialistic, empirical science.
Okay.
On the right, you have the intricately patterned stained glass of a Gothic cathedral.
Representing ancient faith.
Right. Ancient faith, intuition, and the search for meaning. So it's the ultimate visual of the cold, hard facts of science versus the warm, abstract intuition of religion.
The two sides of the canyon.
Exactly. But then the storyboard dictates that as the camera pulls back, the boundaries between these two images dissolve. The organic curves of the anatomical brain and the geometric spiritual patterns of the stained glass begin to vibrate. They sync up until they merge completely into a unified, pulsing 2.30 terahertz electromagnetic spectrum visualization.
Okay, 2.30 terahertz. That is a very, very specific number. Why are they pulling that frequency out of thin air?
Well, they aren't pulling it out of thin air, not according to their framework. The sources state that 2.3 terahertz is the primary resonance frequency of the DNA backbone itself.
Wait, really? The DNA backbone?
Yes, they visualize this frequency as a literal physical bridge between our biological wetware, our physical bodies, and the invisible energy sectors of the universe.
That is wild.
The narrator in this storyboard makes a profound statement over this visual. They say theology, for thousands of years, has asked why we are here. The C4 framework claims to finally provide the how.
The actual mechanics.
It's taken the supernatural and simply redefining it as nature operating at a scale or a frequency that was just, outside our standard biological instrumentation until very recently.
So if ancient people were just using the best words they had, the vocabulary of kingdoms and kings, to describe a literal physical field of energy that permeates the universe, that completely flips the script.
It does.
But it raises a massive question. If the kingdom of heaven is just a physical field, what does that make the historical figures who spoke about it?
Yeah.
Like, what does it make Jesus of Nazareth in this framework? Because obviously, he is the central, pivotal figure of the traditional theological model.
This is where the C4 translation gets incredibly specific and, frankly, radical.
Let's get into it.
By correcting that initial category error, the framework completely strips away the ecclesiastical and geopolitical dogmas layered over Jesus in the centuries after his life.
Okay.
Instead of viewing him as a magical deity who came down from a cloud to demand behavioral submission, the C4 text redefines him mechanically. They call him a highly coherent biological antenna.
A biological antenna. I mean, that is a wild, almost sci-fi phrase. Let's really dig into what that means mechanically. Because an antenna isn't magic. It's a piece of hardware.
Exactly. In standard physics, an antenna is a device that acts as an interface.
Right.
It sits between radio waves propagating through space and electric currents moving in metal conductors. It translates an invisible ambient field into localized, readable data.
Okay, I'm with you.
The C4 text argues that a human being is essentially a localized macroscopic node. We are biological structures made of vibrating matter, capable of interacting with underlying quantum fields.
So we are all antennas.
We're all antennas, and Jesus, in this view, was an antenna operating at peak thermodynamic efficiency. He was perfectly phase-locked with the phi field.
Let's break down phase locked, because that's crucial. If I'm remembering my physics correctly, phase refers to the position of a point in time on a waveform cycle.
That's right.
So, to use an analogy, if we think of two sound waves, if they are out of phase, their peaks and valleys clash. They create destructive interference. It's just
A
noise.
bit static, yeah.
But if you have noise-canceling headphones, they work by reading the ambient noise and creating a wave that perfectly matches it to cancel it out. Or they can phase lock to amplify a signal. If two waves are phase lock, they are vibrating in perfect unison.
Exactly. Perfect.
There's no friction. There is no interference.
That noise-canceling analogy is perfect. When waves are out of phase, the localized structure is fighting the global structure. The C4 text argues that the phi field is the universal substrate. It is the foundational background energy that preserves quantum information and collective consciousness.
Right.
Jesus' consciousness, his internal biological frequency, was vibrating in perfect, frictionless harmony with that foundational universal field.
So his headphones were perfectly tuned to eliminate all localized static.
That's exactly how they frame it.
The source text actually takes specific, famous quotes from the New Testament and runs them through this C4 translation engine. It decodes the first-century cosmology into physics. Let's start with the big one, the kingdom of heaven. Because you read the text, Jesus talked about this constantly. It was his main subject.
He did, and what's fascinating here is how deeply he frustrated the people around him who were looking for a literal physical kingdom.
Oh, right. Because of the Roman occupation.
Exactly. In the first century, people wanted a political revolution. They wanted a geographical paradise. They wanted to overthrow the Romans. But the C4 text points to Luke 17, where Jesus explicitly says, "The kingdom of God does not come with observation, for indeed the kingdom of God is within you."
Right. You can't point a telescope at it. You can't conquer it with an army or, draw a border around it on a map.
And C4 aligns this ancient frustration perfectly with what they call the ultralight axion-like particle field, or the ULAP dark sector.
ULAP dark sector. Okay, let's unpack that.
In modern astrophysics, we know that standard baryonic matter, the stuff that makes up you, me, the Earth, the stars, everything we can see, only accounts for about 5% of the universe.
Only 5%.
Yeah. The other 95% is dark matter and dark energy.
Stuff we know is there because of gravity, but we absolutely cannot perceive it with our eyes or our standard instruments.
Right. It doesn't interact with electromagnetism in a way we can easily see. Now, axions are theoretical particles proposed to make up this dark matter. They are ultralight, meaning they behave more like a wavy classical field than individual billiard balls bouncing around.
Okay, a wavy field.
The C4 framework posits that the phi field operates within this ULAP dark sector. It is an omnipresent background state that permeates all of reality. It is quite literally everywhere, passing right through our bodies, but it's completely imperceptible to our normal baryonic senses.
It's the invisible ocean we are all swimming in, but we only have eyes that can see the fish.
Precisely. Because it is a fundamental topological configuration of reality, you cannot find it by looking outward or up at the sky, just as the ancient text warned.
Right.
Accessing its structural logic requires internal harmonic tuning. You cannot grasp the 95% with your hands. You have to tune your localized consciousness, aligning your internal phase from within your biological architecture. That is the literal physical translation of "the kingdom is within you."
It makes an astonishing amount of sense when you frame it like that. I mean, you can't see the radio waves in the air. If you want to prove a radio station exists, walking around looking for it in the sky is totally useless.
Right, you'd look crazy.
The only way to prove the station exists is to sit still and turn the dial on your internal receiver until you catch the frequency. And the C4 framework is saying Jesus had tuned his biological dial perfectly to the dark sector.
Which leads directly to the next major translation, and this one addresses a core theological conflict.
Okay, what is it?
The orthodox category error separates the creator from the creation. It treats them as two completely separate entities, like the craftsman and the chair he built.
The big guy in the sky making the Earth down here.
Right. But in the C4 model, the macroscopic phase dynamics of the universe represent a continuous, inextricably entangled whole. There is no separation between the field and the nodes within the field.
Which gives a totally new, almost mathematical context to the famous quote from John 10, "I and the Father are one."
Yes, exactly.
Traditionally, that has been interpreted as a claim to exclusive supernatural divinity, like a king saying, "I am the boss, I am the ruler."
But the C4 alignment strips away that hierarchical interpretation. It translates this as a declaration of zero-phase divergence. In this vocabulary, the Father isn't an old man on a throne. The Father is the macrostate.
The macros.
Yes. It is the totality of the global phi field and its underlying structural logic, the entire ocean. And the Son, or Jesus, is the localized microstate, the individual biological antenna.
The drop in the ocean. But it's not just a poetic metaphor here. It's a statement of physical resonance. The secondary text we have, the Galilean resonance, explains this. Jesus was not claiming a lonely exclusive royalty. He was declaring a state of perfect wave harmony.
From a physics perspective, he is stating that his localized oscillator, his consciousness, is operating in perfect resonance with the global field.
Wow.
He is experiencing zero destructive interference from a localized ego. He has quieted the internal static so completely that there is no longer any friction between his individual mind and the foundational structure of the universe.
Wait, if we just pause and follow the logic of that for a second. If Jesus was just a perfectly tuned antenna, it implies that the hardware he was using is exactly the same hardware we all have.
It does.
Like we're all antennas. The only difference is the amount of static we are broadcasting.
That is the inescapable logical conclusion of the entire framework. It democratizes the whole concept of divinity. It moves it from exclusive, unreachable magic to an accessible, albeit incredibly difficult, state of physics.
But that raises the immediate practical question. If we all have the hardware, why are we experiencing so much static? Why are we missing the radio station?
Right. How do we tune our dials?
Yeah. And this actually moves us into mapping ancient moral concepts into modern physics definitions. Let's talk about human behavior, specifically the physics of sin and the network of love.
Let's start with the most famous behavioral directive, the Golden Rule. Love your neighbor as yourself.
A classic.
In a traditional moral framework, this is viewed as a nice ethical suggestion for social harmony. It's polite, it keeps civilization running smoothly so we don't all kill each other.
Right.
But the C4 framework strips away the moralizing and looks at it strictly through the lens of thermodynamics and entanglement entropy.
Okay, entanglement entropy. We need to break that down. What does entanglement actually mean in this context?
In quantum physics, entanglement is a phenomenon where two or more particles become inextricably linked. Their states are bound together so that whatever happens to one immediately affects the other, regardless of how far apart they are.
Even if they are on opposite sides of the galaxy.
Exactly. In the C4 model, the phi field acts as the entanglement entropy functional for the entire universe. It means that the literal physics of our reality is a massively entangled network. Everything is connected at a fundamental, subatomic, non-local level.
So when the ancient texts quote Jesus saying, "Whatever you did for one of the least of these, you did for me," they aren't just using a poetic metaphor for human empathy.
No, they are not.
They are describing the literal mechanics of absolute physical non-locality.
Exactly. The C4 text argues that in the phi field, the illusion of separate, independent nodes, the idea that you are a completely isolated individual walled off from the person sitting next to you, is a low-level biological construct.
A survival mechanism.
Yeah, it's an evolutionary trick of our brains designed to help us survive, gather food, and reproduce on the savannah. But it is not the fundamental truth of quantum reality. All consciousness is entangled in the underlying metric.
Okay, I see where this is going.
Therefore, to harm someone else, to act with malice, exploitation, or extreme selfishness, is to literally introduce friction and thermodynamic decay into the shared network that you yourself inhabit.
You are literally increasing the entropy of the universe by being a jerk.
In a very mathematically real sense, yes. The text defines love not as a fleeting romantic emotion or a chemical flush in the brain, but as the human psychological translation of optimal thermodynamic efficiency and macroscopic wave coherence.
Wow.
Love is the state where the network operates with the least amount of destructive friction.
That completely changes how you view morality. Love is optimal thermodynamic efficiency. It's not about avoiding punishment from a cosmic judge who is tracking your bad deeds in a ledger. It's about not breaking the physical machine you are currently living inside.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the concept of sin, because for centuries, sin has been weaponized. It's taught as a permanent stain, a black mark on your soul that angers a monarch. But the source material points out something fascinating about the original language.
Yes, the original Greek word used for sin in the New Testament is hamartia. And historically, that word did not mean a permanent moral stain.
What did it mean?
It was an archery term. It literally meant to miss the mark.
To miss the mark, like an archer missing the bullseye or a musician playing a flat note.
Precisely. And the C4 framework seizes on this translation. It redefines sin as frequency misalignment or wave decoherence. Sin is thermodynamic noise that disrupts the topology of the field.
Acoustic static.
Right. If the universe is a symphony, a highly coherent wave structure, then selfish, fearful, or destructive actions are literally acoustic static. They are destructive interference loops.
Let me play devil's advocate here, though. If sin is just static or thermodynamic noise, doesn't that dangerously strip away personal accountability?
How so?
Well, if I maliciously hurt someone, am I just a poorly tuned radio? Where's the choice in that? Isn't that a bit reductionist?
It's a vital question. The C4 framework would argue that conscious decoherence is the choice. In this model, you are a conscious node with the ability to control your resonance. Choosing to act with malice, choosing to exploit another node, is a conscious decision to maximize entropy. You are actively choosing to inject chaos into the system for short-term, localized biological gain-feeding the ego at the expense of the global structure.
Ah, I see.
The accountability lies in the fact that you are degrading the very metric that sustains you. You are choosing the disease of static over the health of coherence.
Okay, so if we are accountable for the static we create, how do we clear it? The text brings up the concept of forgiveness, the famous mandate to forgive 70 times 7.
Right.
Usually we think of forgiveness as a favor we do for someone else, or a legal pardon where we agree not to sue them or seek revenge. But the C4 alignment defines forgiveness as an active, mechanical necessity for entropy dissipation.
Right. Think about what happens when you hold on to a grievance. When you harbor deep resentment, anger, or a desire for vengeance, you are maintaining a localized topological snag in the field.
That's it.
You are spending your own internal energy to sustain a destructive interference loop. The framework argues that forgiveness is not about moral superiority. It is a mechanical necessity to clear the field.
Wow.
By refusing to hold on to those grievances, a coherent node, a person actively dissipates that localized entropy, restoring harmony to the collective wave dynamics.
So forgiveness isn't a legal pardon from a sky judge. It's an actual release valve for cosmic static. If I'm understanding this correctly, how does that change the way we process a bad day at work or a massive fight with a friend?
It changes everything.
Because suddenly, holding on to anger isn't just making your blood pressure spike, it's mechanically damaging the thermodynamic efficiency of your own environment.
It implies a set of highly practical daily habits for anyone wanting to optimize their human antenna. The sources explicitly suggest that tuning this internal receiver requires quieting the mind, reducing the internal static of the ego through stillness or meditation. It requires actively practicing forgiveness, not as a favor to the offender, but to release your own destructive interference loops. And it requires focusing intensely on deep connection rather than the biological illusion of separation.
It turns meditation, empathy, and forgiveness into acts of cosmic engineering. You are literally maintaining the health of the quantum field by being a forgiving, connected person.
That's the idea.
It's incredibly empowering, but also a staggering responsibility. Because everything we've talked about so far is about how to tune our personal antenna in the present while we are walking around in these physical, carbon-based bodies.
Right, the here and now.
But the sources tackle the biggest question of all. Wait, if my biological antenna eventually breaks down when I die, does the network lose my data? What actually happens to this frequency when the physical body expires?
That is the ultimate test of any framework, and this brings us to the quantum mechanics of the eternal. The C4 model leans heavily into advanced cosmology here to explain the soul as data.
Okay, let's get into the cosmology.
Standard religious models talk about an eternal soul that travels to a metaphysical location, a physical heaven with pearly gates, or a physical hell. The C4 model abandons metaphysical locations entirely and relies on a foundational concept in physics known as quantum unitarity.
Okay, quantum unitarity. Let's make sure we have a solid practical grasp on that. Remind me what that means practically.
At its core, quantum unitarity is a fundamental law of quantum mechanics, which dictates that information can never be truly destroyed in the universe. Probabilities must always add up to 1.
So the math always has to balance.
Exactly. A physical system can change states. Matter can be converted into energy, things can burn, dissolve, or evaporate, but the fundamental quantum information that describes the state of that system must always be conserved. The universe is a perfect memory bank.
Because if information were lost, the fundamental math of quantum mechanics would collapse.
Right, it would completely break down.
So how does the C4 video storyboard visualize this preservation of information? Because they tackle this head-on in what they call the unitarity paradox scene.
They use the visual of a black hole's event horizon. Now, historically, in the mid-20th century, physicists thought black holes destroyed everything, including information, which, violated unitarity.
Stephen Hawking famously debated this.
Yes, the Hawking information paradox. But the video shows the event horizon not as a void of destruction, but as a highly dense two-dimensional data storage surface. Then, the storyboard extrapolates this concept to the scale of the entire universe.
Oh, wow.
They show the universe expanding and aging toward what they call its conformal boundary. They use a specific mathematical symbol, omega, approaching 0.
Okay, I want to break down this conformal boundary idea because it relates to the CCC part of C4 conformal cyclic cosmology. Let's use the much more grounded metaphor from the Galilean resonance text. The seasons.
Yes, the flower metaphor.
Right. Think about a flower in the late autumn. When winter comes, the physical body of the flower freezes. It breaks down and dies. The physical matter dissolves into the dirt.
It's gone.
But the structural logic of that flower, the DNA, the biological blueprint, is safely encoded into a tiny seed that survives the freezing temperatures of winter to bloom again in the spring.
That is a brilliant biological analog for the physics of conformal cyclic cosmology. In CCC, the universe doesn't just have one Big Bang, expand forever, and end in a permanent dead freeze.
It cycles.
It breathes in infinite cycles, or eons. As our current universe expands over trillions of years, physical matter eventually decays. Even the largest macroscopic black holes will eventually evaporate via Hawking radiation.
So everything just dissolves.
The physical world as we know it becomes nothing but a vast, cold expanse of massless photons. It approaches that conformal crossover limit.
The ultimate winter of the universe.
Exactly. But here's the trick of conformal geometry. For massless particles like photons, time and distance lose their meaning. They don't experience them. So in a universe completely devoid of mass, scale becomes mathematically irrelevant.
Wait, really?
Yes. The infinitely expanded, incredibly cold future of our universe mathematically rescales. Because of quantum unitarity, the information is not destroyed. The video storyboard shows this information leaking or transitioning into the invisible phi field across what they call the sigma boundary.
So the phi field acts as the cosmic hard drive that survives the reset. When a biological body dissolves, when we die, our structural essence, the quantum data of our consciousness, what traditional theology calls the soul, is phase-encoded into this field.
And the source quotes Jesus here to support this translation. He who believes in me will live, even though he dies. The C4 alignment argues that belief in this context isn't about intellectually agreeing with a set of religious rules. It's about achieving coherence.
Wow.
If a node person achieves high wave coherence, their structural logic is safely and purely encoded into the field. Eternal life is just the thermodynamic guarantee of information conservation. The data is carried across the sigma boundary to seed the spring of the next universe.
Which perfectly maps to the famous cryptic quote, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end.
It does.
Standard religion paints this terrifying linear apocalypse, everything burns, the world ends, and then you face a judge. But the C4 framework, using conformal cyclic cosmology, paints this incredibly beautiful, infinite breathing circle.
A continuous loop.
The universe breathes out and then breathes in. The infinitely expanded, cold future maps smoothly to the hot, dense singularity of the next Big Bang. There is no final darkness. Just a seamless transition where the end of our story becomes the exact birthplace of the next.
And by identifying completely with the phi field, the Galilean antenna is speaking from the perspective of that eternal continuum. He is speaking as the substrate that bridges the cycles.
But wait, if my data survives to seed the next universe, what exactly is the nature of the data I am writing right now? Because if I am providing the literal seed for the next Big Bang, that completely changes the stakes of my daily life. It changes how I interact with the barista at the coffee shop today.
This is perhaps the most radical and empowering aspect of the entire C4 framework. The text refers to humanity not as passive observers floating in a cold, indifferent universe, but as architects in training.
Architects in training, I like that.
Our daily choices are not just fleeting psychological events that disappear into the ether, they are actual geometric data being written into the structural foundation of future cosmic realities.
Okay, let's slow down and unpack this mechanism. My choices today are geometric data for the next universe.
Yeah.
How does the source material actually mechanically explain this?
The video storyboard details this in a highly technical scene 4. It starts with a macroscopic view of a human facing an intense moral or creative decision, a moment of profound empathy or leap of immense creativity.
Okay.
Then the camera zooms all the way down, past the organs, past the cells, focusing on tiny structures deep within our neurons called cytoskeletal microtubules.
Microtubules. These are essentially the tiny scaffolding structures inside our cells, right? They give the cell its shape.
Yes, but in advanced theoretical biophysics, which the C4 framework co-ops here, they are sometimes posited as the quantum processors of the brain, the site where quantum wave functions collapse to create biological consciousness.
Oh, wow.
The storyboard visualizes these microtubules vibrating in perfect harmony during a moment of profound moral choice. When you make a highly coherent choice, it generates a localized quantum vibration that causes a literal ripple in the gravitational background.
So our highest thoughts are creating microscopic gravitational waves.
In this framework, yes. This action creates what the C4 text calls a choice imprint, denoted mathematically as C sub n. And this imprint is a permanent geometric knot encoded directly into the Weyl curvature tensor.
Okay, hold on. Weyl curvature tensor. I'm going to need a lifeline here. Let's assume spacetime is a mattress. I know general relativity says gravity is like a bowling ball making a dent in that mattress. What is Weyl curvature?
That's a good starting point. The bowling ball making a dent is the Ricci curvature. It described how space-time curves where matter is actually present.
Got it. That's where the mass is.
But what about the space around the bowling ball? Or what happens after the bowling ball rolls away? The Weyl tensor describes the curvature of space-time in a vacuum. It describes tidal forces, how light gets distorted, the twisting and shearing of space itself, independent of local matter. Think of it as the lingering creases and ripples in the mattress fabric. The C4 framework suggests that our most coherent choices literally leave tiny, permanent scars or knots in this fundamental geometric fabric.
And because of quantum unitarity, because information can't be destroyed, these wheel knots survive the death of the universe.
Exactly. They survive the cosmic reset across the conformal boundary. The geometric knots we create today act as the gravitational anomalies, the seeds that will influence the clumping of matter, the formation of star systems, and the birth of galaxies in the next eon.
That is mind-blowing.
That is what they mean by sourcing the metric. You are not an accident of chemistry. You are consciously engineering the structural density of the future.
If I'm engineering the future, how do I ensure I'm building something good? The text talks a lot about faith in this context. It quotes the famous mustard seed metaphor. If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move.
Right.
Traditionally, faith just means believing a doctrine without demanding proof. But here, they redefine faith as absolute macroscopic phase dynamic stability.
Right. It means consciousness operating with zero doubt, zero fear, and zero localized decoherence. To use an analogy, think about a standard light bulb versus a laser.
Okay.
A light bulb scatters light in every possible direction. It's incoherent, messy, so it can only light up a small room. A laser takes that exact same amount of light energy and makes all the photon waves perfectly parallel, phase-locked, and highly coherent.
So it's concentrated.
Because of that coherence, a laser can cut through steel or bounce a signal off the moon. The C4 text argues that faith is a biological laser.
A biological laser. So when a human consciousness finds perfect stillness and absolute clarity, when they become a laser, they activate what the text calls the alpha drive.
Yes, the alpha drive.
They can mathematically couple to the underlying field to alter localized probabilities. It's like singing a perfectly pure note that shatters a glass but applied to quantum probability.
Yes, and this introduces the ultimate purpose of this whole system, what the text calls the graduation and the filter. The C4 video shows a digital representation of two different evolutionary paths for a civilization.
Okay, what are the paths?
The first path is the entropy groove. This represents a civilization that expands mechanically, acts purely on biological impulses, burns resources out of fear and greed, and eventually glows red with waste heat. They maximize physical entropy. In the C4 framework, this is the literal definition of evil. Evil is not a mystical force, it is the physical failure to resist chaotic dissipation.
Being evil is just being incredibly inefficient, selfish, and noisy on a cosmic scale.
Precisely. The other path focuses on geometric density. This civilization focuses on internal coherence, non-local connection, and love. Its signature becomes cooler, more structured, and eventually, the text claims, invisible to standard instruments as it merges entirely with the phi field.
Wow.
Evolution, the framework argues, is just a cosmic filter designed to sort the static from the signal. Achieving critical coherence is the final graduation from the cyclic loop. You ascend out of the visible 3D metric because you have finally learned to speak the language of the architect perfectly.
Okay, this is undeniably beautiful. It is basically the most poetic, empowering cosmic philosophy I'd ever heard. It gives weight to every action. But the C4 framework aggressively calls itself the C4 synthesis and claims to be a hard science.
It does make that claim, yes.
And any good scientific theory must be falsifiable, meaning you have to be able to design a physical experiment that could prove it wrong. If you can't test it, it's just a beautiful philosophy.
And the authors of the C4 Institute agree. They do not just leave this as a theological metaphor. They outline very specific, highly technical experimental designs to falsify their own postulates. They want to prove that this framework is measurable in reality.
So let's break down the three main postulates they propose testing.
Let's do it. Postulate 1, while information transfer. This relates to the idea that the knots we make today survive the death of the universe and seed the next one.
Right. How on earth do they propose we look for geometric scars from a previous universe in our current universe?
They look to the deepest past we can see. Specifically, they propose analyzing the cosmic microwave background by spectrum, or CMB. The CMB is the remnant radiation from the Big Bang. It's the afterglow of creation.
Okay.
They state we should look for a parity-odd tensor non-Gaussianity.
Break that down for us. What does a parity-odd tensor non-Gaussianity actually look like?
Simply put, they are looking for a non-random chiral or handed bias in the way the early universe formed. Imagine looking at a vast collection of spiral galaxies. If the Big Bang was truly a random blank slate explosion, there should be an equal number of galaxies spinning clockwise and counterclockwise.
There should be no bias.
Right, no bias. But if we analyze the CMB and find a distinct bias, if the temperature fluctuations lean heavily in one geometric direction, it implies the seeds of structure were already there. It implies we inherited a blueprint from a prior cycle.
They also mention mapping the Eridanus supervoid to prove this.
Yes. The CMB cold spot, located in the constellation Eridanus, is a massive, unusually cold and empty region of space that defies standard cosmological models. The C4 design calls for high-resolution mapping to search for anomalous cold spot decorrelation.
Which means what?
They hypothesize that giant voids like this aren't random empty spaces. They might actually be geometric echoes. Massive structural footprints left over from the dense black holes of the universe that existed before ours. They are literally looking for cosmological fossils to prove the conformal boundary is porous to information.
Okay, that covers the massive cosmic scale. What about postulate 2, the phi field itself, the ULAP dynamics? How do they prove this invisible 95% dark ocean of energy is real and that macroscopic objects interact with it?
They propose a few methods. One is a highly sensitive lab experiment using atom interferometry to detect localized deviations from the Born rule. The Born rule is the fundamental law in quantum mechanics that gives us the probability of a particle being in a certain location.
Okay.
If they can show that a highly coherent human consciousness acting as a coupling constant can briefly alter those fundamental probabilities, it proves the alpha drive. But the more dramatic macro-scale proposals involve observing our own atmosphere.
This is where the text gets into UFO territory, right? It explicitly mentions UAPs.
It does. It suggests forensic monitoring of unidentified anomalous phenomena. The C4 hypothesis makes a specific prediction. If these craft are utilizing the phi field for topological propulsion, essentially shunting or warping the space-time metric to move at incredible speeds without standard chemical propellant, they will leave a very specific thermodynamic signature in the air behind them.
What kind of signature?
They predict a 14-second lag in the thermal exhaust. If we detect that specific temporal lag in the heat signature, it proves the local metric is being artificially topologically manipulated.
They also mention searching the stratosphere for something called an isotopic drift index. What exactly would a chemist be looking for on a spectrometer?
They hypothesize that if a UAP or even a highly coherent biological event emits high-energy electromagnetic resonance at that specific 2.30 Hz frequency, it would cause abiotic resonance synthesis.
Which does what to the air?
Basically, it would alter the standard natural ratios of certain isotopes in the air, like the ratio of nitrogen-15 to oxygen-18. And it would do this without any biological or standard chemical cause. Finding these skewed isotopic ratios, hitting what they call the Manhattan limit, would serve as a permanent chemical fingerprint of metric engineering.
A literal chemical footprint of the architect. That is incredible. And finally, postulate 3, the alpha drive or conscious injection. How do they propose testing the idea that the physical human brain can actually sync with this cosmic field?
This is where they pivot from astrophysics to cognitive and medical science. They propose longitudinal fMRI studies of a very common yet mysterious human experience, déjà vu.
Oh, wow. Déjà vu.
Yes, but specifically a subset they call perfect replay déjà vu. The traditional medical consensus is that déjà vu is just a memory glitch, a slight delay or misfiring in the brain's temporal lobe where it processes the present moment as a memory. The C4 framework predicts these are not glitches at all. They predict that an fMRI would show these moments as measurable, global, quantum coherent spikes across the brain. It's a moment where your biological antenna momentarily, accidentally, perfectly syncs with the global state of the phi field, giving you a millisecond flash of the entire data structure.
So déjà vu isn't a glitch. It's a literal moment of omniscience disguised as a brain stutter.
That's how they frame it.
And there's one more medical reframing proposed in the text, and it is a heavy one. They discuss a radical new way to view schizophrenia.
Yes, and we must emphasize that the text is proposing a theoretical structural redefinition, not giving medical advice. Traditional medicine views schizophrenia as a severe psychological and neurological disorder characterized by hallucinations and disorganized thinking.
Right.
The C4 experimental design proposes reframing it as unintegrated resonance. In their model, it is viewed as a hardware failure of the microtubule antenna.
So instead of a broken pathological mind, it's an antenna that is picking up far too much signal all the time from the global field without the biological shielding or coherence required to process it.
Exactly. The text describes it as the brain experiencing excessive neurophysiological load. The proposed experiment is to clinically measure the neurophysiological load index to differentiate between standard pathological noise in the brain and genuine high bandwidth reception that the local biological structure simply cannot integrate.
Wow.
It is a profound paradigm-shifting shift from a purely pathological view to a neurostructural one.
That is massive. If we pull all of these staggering concepts together, we've gone on an insane journey today.
We really have.
We started with ancient Galilean poetry about mustard seeds and forgiving your neighbor. We mapped that onto conformal cyclic cosmology and the wild curvature tensor. We ended up looking at fMRI scans of déjà vu, thermal exhaust legs of UAPs, and the geometric chiral data of the cosmic microwave background. It is an overwhelming synthesis.
It truly is. The C4 framework takes the deepest, most intuitive spiritual teachings of human history, specifically the interconnected, love-based physics of Jesus, and attempts to give them a rigid, testable mathematical scaffolding.
Right.
It removes the need for blind doctrinal faith and replaces it with a call for structural biological coherence. It reframes our entire existence from being a random, accidental byproduct of chaotic chemistry to being active, interconnected data nodes fighting the decay of the universe through the thermodynamic mechanism of love.
And what I love most about this is the immediate relevance. Whether you are preparing for a massive, stressful corporate meeting, trying to raise a toddler, or just going about your normal day, the C4 framework is essentially saying your internal frequency matters.
It absolutely matters.
The way you handle stress, the way you actively forgive the person who cut you off in traffic, these aren't just personal, fleeting psychological moments that disappear. They are thermodynamic contributions to the universe. You are actively tuning the physical reality around you.
Your choices are the literal geometry of the future. It is the ultimate responsibility, but also the ultimate scientific validation of human connection and empathy.
Which leaves me with one final kind of mind-bending thought to mull over as we wrap this up. The C4 framework states that our daily choices, our empathy, and our moral integrities today are literally acting as the geometric data, the CAD files, that will construct the physical laws of the next universe.
Yes.
Our love builds the next reality's foundation.
Yeah.
But if we assume that is true, look around at our current universe, look at the foundation of quantum mechanics, It is bizarre. It's full of paradoxes. We have black holes that warp time, spooky action at a distance, particles that are in two places at once, and chaotic entropy.
It is a highly volatile, deeply strange, and often violent reality at the subatomic level.
Exactly. So my question is,
Yeah.
if the universe is built on the data of the previous cycle, what kind of strange, chaotic, unpredictable choices were the inhabitants of the previous universe making to build the bizarre, paradoxical reality we are living in right now?
That is a profound question. If the universe is a reflection of the choices made in the previous eon, we are navigating the structural echoes of an entirely forgotten and perhaps highly chaotic civilization.
Definitely something to keep you awake tonight. We want to thank you so much for joining us on this massive deep dive. Keep questioning the dichotomy between science and faith, keep tuning your internal antenna, and keep exploring the incredible architecture of the world around you. Until next time.